guys, how you doing? Welcome to another episode of Muscle Minibike Builds. Well, here we are working on the Hot Tilly project. Today is reassembly day and probably start up and break-in. We started out with a 212cc Tillotson Hemi motor that we're converting to a non-Hemi and adding a whole bunch of Go Fast goodies from our friends over at Go Power Sports. Alright, so what do we got going on next? We're going to start putting this motor back together. New cam, new piston, new rod, new flywheel, new carburetor, you know the build. It's the Hot Tilly project, trying to get 20 horsepower out of it. It's going on the Temecula Bob frame that's going to be restored, and we're revealing the whole thing at Joe's Minibike Reunion, October 19th in La Crescenta, California. We have our tools laid out here, we got our parts laid out as you can plainly see. So let's get going, start putting this thing back together. Follow along, we're going to take some measurements as we do this, and have a good time. See you in a bit. You get a general idea of the porting that was done. At this point of assembly, we lapped in the valves using both fine and coarse lapping compound. What this does is fits the valve to the valve seat to create a perfect seal. So when the valve is closed, it's airtight and it seals the cylinder. Once you're done lapping in the valves, this is what the valve should look like. It's cut to match the valve seat, so when the two surfaces meet, they give you a perfect seal. As you can see, the ring matches on both pieces, both the valve and valve seat. Next step is to install the valves, get the keepers in place, use a spring compressor to hold everything down. Once you remove the spring compressor, you'll see the keeper slowly lock itself, and then the spring compressor comes off. That's what it looks like when it's completed. And that's the finished product right there with the valves in place. We have swag, recoil stickers, and t-shirts. Check in the description below on how to order. Okay, so basically what we're going to start with here is get the rod prepped and ready. And we got to take some measurements with the crank. I always put it in a vise with padded jaws and then doubly padded with doubled up terry cloth towels. So get this thing apart, we're going to set the bearings in it, and then you have to put the crank in it, torque it down to spec, take a measurement. This is the right way to do it. Take a measurement with plastic gauge and make sure your clearances are within tolerance. So these are 12-point quarter-inch head bolts right here, and if you look at these washers only go on one way. See the concave side? I don't know if you can see that. The concave side goes up against the head. Do not put them the other way. They won't torque right, and that's not correct. Okay, so we'll get that apart. Let's get the bearing set in it. Alright, here's the bearing cap. And if you see the bearing cap, it's got this little tab right here. And if you look at the bearing has a corresponding tab. Line them up, get them in place, push it in. Now you can see that little tab lines up with the notch in the bearing cap. We also need to do the same on the rod. Connecting rod and cap have the bearings installed. So now it's time to set the crank in place, put some plastic gauge on it, torque them to spec, and take a measurement. So as you can see, there's a piece of red plastic gauge in there, that we're going to squeeze, it will expand, and we take a measurement to make sure it's within clearance. Place the bearing cap on it. We're installing the bolts with a small amount of moly lube on it so you can get the proper torque. Screw them in hand tight. Get them bottomed out. Okay, now let's start the torque process. Okay, so initially we're going to start the torque process, bring them up to 60 pounds. First go around, set your torque wrench right at 60. You want to alternate side to side. Clicked, click, and then bring it up 20 at a time. So now we're going to go to 80. And now we take it to 100. When you do this for the first time, it doesn't feel like a whole lot, but you'll realize it is as you start to put it together because we're dealing in inch pounds. So now we're going to bring it to 100. And there's 100. Continue on up to 150 pounds, inch pounds that is. That's 150 pounds right there. Now, once we get to 150, we're going to back it down 20 and loosen it back down to 100. So now we're back down at 130. And bring it back down to 100. From this point forward, retorque the connecting rod bolts back up to 170 inch-pounds. That is their final spec for torque. Alternate back and forth, bringing it up about 20 inch-pounds per turn. Installing your piston rings is a certain orientation. You see the grooves in the piston. The first set of rings you have at the bottom are the oil rings. You have these two very thin rings, and then the oil or the waffle ring that goes in the middle of them. So they would go in first, followed by the solid black ring, followed by the black ring with the silver edge on it. And if you also notice that these rings do have a letter, I don't know if you can make it out, it's probably too small, but there is a letter on the top of the ring. So whenever you have a set of these, any of these rings, any markings always faces up. Now we're going to check ring gap. I already checked ring gap on the second ring. This is the top ring. And basically what I like to do is set the ring in place, push it down a little bit, take the piston upside down, put it in there, and just square it up. So now it's even all the way around. Ring gap should be about 4 thousandths. Here is a 4 thousandths feeler gauge. Stick it in. Perfect. Perfect. Right at 4 thousandths. Optimum for a street motor. Any tighter than that, they can jam up. Any looser than that, weak compression. But 4 thousandths is about where you want to be. Piston rings are installed. Next thing you want to do is make sure you line them up. You don't want gaps lined up. Let me show you the wrong way to do it. You see how everything there is all lined up? Gap, gap, gap. That's no good. You're not going to get a compression. So you want to stagger them. But the other thing is you don't want to line it up above the wrist pin either. So you basically stagger them randomly around the piston. So when they compress, they're sealed all the way around and they're not lined up with each other to let any compression leak by or blow by down to the bottom end. Take your wrist pin, rod, and piston, and you're going to now assemble the whole thing. What I will do first is put the clip, which is the circlip that goes in here, and that keeps the wrist pin inside the piston, which obviously keeps it connected to the connecting rod, right? Simple. Now we'll do some assembly. A little moly lube, make sure everything's lubed up real good. Piston, arrow down, rod, right orientation. Boom, fits like a glove. Just need to install the circlip, and this part of this assembly will be complete. We can then install the crank, drop the piston, connect it to the crankshaft, torque it down, and that part of the short block is completed. Circlip is in. You want to make sure you rotate it away from the opening groove right here. Just give it a little slide. There we go. It's set in the groove. It's away from where you hook it to pull it out. I have these really neat setup plates I got from Danny Holloway. He's on the Muscle Minibike Builds page. You can find him. He sells them both for Hemi and non-Hemi. The only difference between the Hemi and non-Hemi is the diameter of the end of the camshaft. The hole on the Lexan is smaller on one than it is on the other. What's nice about these clear setup plates is you can put them in and rotate the whole assembly. Check for clearance issues, check cam for issues with the crank. It's just a nice piece to have. Now it's time to pop the lifters in, get the cam in, put a little assembly lube on them. It's basically just sticky, heavy oil. Lube them up real good. Can't use too much of it. It's heavy and sticky. And basically it'll hold them up in place too while you get the cam in. Put a little on the cam lobes. Make sure the lifters are up in there. Get your cam timing right. Dot to dot. Line it up. Oh, before I forget, let me put a little drop back here. There we go. Put it in the rear, line it up. There we go, our timing is right on. The two dots line up. Lifters are in. Now we get ready to put on the side cover. Did a second measure. Came out at 20 thousandths in the hole as compared to the original piston, which was about 13 thousandths in the hole. But we're making up for the compression with the milled head and the flat top versus a dished piston. Alright, at this point we're going to get the side cover ready to go on. There's a couple things you got to do. One, you got to put the supplied plug in that fitting right there. make sure you use Teflon tape. But when you use Teflon tape, get the yellow, not the white. That works for gas and oil. So we're going to do that. You also have to set the gasket in the machine groove around the back of the cover. Now it's usually a pain in the butt, but I got a pretty good system for doing it. Is I follow it with my finger and lightly pull and work it down into the groove, but don't pull too much that you stretch it thin and it ends up flush. There's a happy medium between getting it in and not getting it in, and you'll feel it as you go around, and where you got a good ridge all the way around, so you know it'll seal. When you get to the end, you cut it about a hair bigger, and then basically just push it in, and they butt right at the top. If you did it right, it should look like that right at the top, butted, clean, and tight. Okay, so that's the side cover prep for going on. I don't use the included Allen bolts and washer, only because I prefer to go with a stud kit with nuts and then new washers underneath. However, there is one thing you need to do. The amount of room that you have around the machined area on the side cover will not allow you to get a full socket in there. So one, I use the smaller diameter washers that fit the nut perfectly. So when the nut sits in there, you're good. And then you got to take a 1/2 inch socket, and what I do is I machine it down to make it an ultra thin wall, and it gets in there and it clears, and you can use your torque wrench and you're all good. So that's just a trick I do. I just wanted to show you on that. So let's get going. We'll mount the studs in the motor, put a little Loctite on them, set them in, and we'll get it going from there. Follow along. Alright, when installing the side cover, you have these shims. You want to start with the thinnest shim first, because you have to set the end play, put it on, come in with the side cover. Okay, side cover is now in. You got to see, you see the slop we got there? We have to take it down to 10 to 15 thousandths. Right now, without even torquing it, I can tell it's way too much. So we'll pull it back off and add another shim. Side cover reinstalled. We played with a few combination of the shims because they're different thicknesses, but now we got it right. $15 thousandths, right on the money. Bill Power Sports. Final torque spec is 210 inch-pounds. This is our last pass. And that's it. 210 inch-pounds, torque to spec, right amount of clearance with the shims on the back end of the crank. Like I said, to go with this setup with studs and nuts, you have to modify a socket. What I do is I just put it in my drill, spin it, put it against the grinding wheel, and then I just slowly taper it down until I get a perfect fit. On to the next step. Time to get the rockers set in the head. These are a set of 1.3 gauge black Venoms. I like to put everything together loosely first. Don't really snug it down yet until we start fitting everything. Two different set of rockers, long and short. Stock length, extended length. I'm going to try the stock length first, put it together, see the geometry, see how everything lines up, and go from there. I'm going to do a test fit on the head. Rockers are installed. As you can see, we put head studs in the motor. A 10 thousandths gasket is being used, and also running a set of lash caps. Got a little assembly lube on everything. Can't use too much of it. See, the lash caps are in place. Now let's try a little test fit here. Now we got to get the rockers set. Get a little screwdriver. And we'll know right away if the long or the short are going to be any good. As soon as we see where they line up. And I can tell we're going to need the long ones. Okay. Let's swap them out real quick. Okay, now time for final assembly. 10 thousandths head gasket sprayed with Permatex copper, front and back. Make sure the head bottoms out on the two dowels. As you can see, like I said before, we do have head studs in it. Let's go ahead and get this head torqued down properly, and then we'll install the Valvetrain, and we'll close up this portion of the top end of the motor. Final torque on the cylinder head at 20 foot-pounds, which is also 240 inch-pounds. Time to adjust the new Valvetrain. Normally it's 3/1000ths of an inch. I like doing them with Chromoly push rods. I set them at 2/1000ths of an inch. I like them a hair tighter, but a light 2. Just a little bit of drag on the feeler gauge coming out is where I want them, which is right there, perfect. Next step, you got to get the flywheel set, but you got to lap it in. Put a little lapping compound on the crank. What the lapping compound does is you run the lapping compound on the crank to the flywheel, spin the flywheel a few times, and it ensures a clean, smooth contact area on the taper. So you have to pull the keyway out, put the flywheel on, and now hold the other end of the crank and spin it while keeping it pushed in. I like to do it 4 times, 2 times in each direction. Okay, pull it out, wipe off the crank, take a look at the crank. You see how even the dull area is? That means it's making good contact surface area on the taper of the flywheel. And if you look at the inside of the flywheel, you can see the matching. It's hard to see in the picture, but you probably see it there. See how it's dull there now? And if you go all the way around, it's even. So that means it's a perfect mating surface from this taper to that taper. Alright, now we're going to put the flywheel on. I got a 4-degree offset flywheel key, which means is I'm adding 4 more degrees to this flywheel for ignition timing. These things come with 34 degrees of advance in it. Adding the 4, which if you look at the key, see how it's got the step cut in it? That'll take the flywheel and advance it. so you'll have 38 degrees of total. That's what I want to run with this motor. I'm going to put the key in, put the flywheel on, set it, and we'll torque it down. Just installed the coil, and this is a 196R coil, which actually has a little bit more pull on it. Set it at 45 thousandths. This particular coil is set up already with an MSD silicone boot and an MSD 8.5 millimeter wire. I bought it from Mike Kosmo from Texas Outlaw Minibikes. You can hook up with him on the Facebook page, but he sells these things, and I'm kind of excited to try it and see how it works over the stock coil. He claims it's a big improvement, so we're going to give it a shot. Look them up if you're interested in buying one, and they're very reasonably priced. Starting to make some good headway. We got the exhaust on it, valve covers on it, valve cover spacer. Just bolting up the intake manifold. Ran the plumbing for the vent. This one will vent right to the valve cover, so any vapor, oil, spray will help lubricate the top end of the motor. This one is going to go to a catch can. Right now we got the intake manifold being bolted on. Intake manifold boot, that's got to get clamped. Let's get the carburetor in place here. Running a 24 millimeter flat slide. Let's get it tightened up and we'll pick it up from there. There it is all together. Just got to hook up our test tank, get some fuel into it. We got a 3-stage F&B pipe, billet side cover. All the other Go Fast goodies are inside. Right now it's in basically a test mode on my test stand. Breather's hooked up, line to the valve cover's hooked up. We got a throttle all set up for it. Kill switch is set. I just got to hook up the test fuel tank, connect a little fuel line, and we'll fire this bad boy up and let you see what it does. Well, here we go. Let's give it a shot. Well, there we go. It runs. Needs to be dialed in. Got to play with the jets a little bit in the carburetor. I did run it before for about 15 minutes to break in the cam and everything else. So that really wasn't technically the first pull. But it was the first pull on camera, so it actually started back up in one pull. We got a little temporary setup here, fuel line, breather, and whatnot. But it sounds pretty good. I'm happy with it overall. It was a great build. The next step now is to start on the Temecula Bob frame that this motor is going into. When we get this thing out to Joe's Minibike Reunion in California next month, October 19th in La Crescenta, California. We're going to put this thing on the dyno, on the bike, and see what it does. You know, I'm happy with everything. I want to thank Go Power Sports for supporting me in this build. Everything came from them. They did a fantastic job, got us everything that we needed. Hope you liked what you saw, but we're not done yet. Next episode, we'll be getting ready to start fitting this to the bike, getting everything all dialed in, and sending the bike out for powder coat. Then it's going to come back. We're going to put it all together, and that's it. But I'm pretty happy the way it came out. Quick little walk around on the motor. 24mm flat slide Mikuni. Seems to work real well. It's got to be rejetted a little bit. I can hear it. It's got a little pop to it. The rockers are real nice. We got the spacer plate on it to move them up, give them plenty of room. It is a clear valve cover. You got to be careful when you put these on. Don't over tighten them. They will crack in the corners if you try to really kill them. And after a couple heat cycles, they are known to sometimes get a crack in it. So just keep an eye on them, but just don't kill them. I was happy with the ignition system we got from Mike. That's all good. And that's about it. Not much more I can tell you from where we're at right now, but follow along for the next episode, and we will be back. Make sure to subscribe, like, and hit the notification button to follow along with all upcoming videos.